While the draft laws also propose bringing e-commerce companies under the tax net. Furthermore, it also advocates a GST threshold limit of 10 lakh rupees. To understand and discuss this further, we are joined by Pratik Jain, who is the national leader of indirect taxes at PwC. Pratik, thanks for joining in. You've gone through that complicated model GST draft that has been proposed. What I want to understand from you, the 10 lakh is significantly lesser than what we were expecting. Industries were voting for a 25 lakh. How much of pain would this be for industries and sectors across the board?
Yes, you're right. I mean, I think the industry was expecting a higher threshold, primarily because today, if you see the Central Excise Act, up to 1.5 crores, there is no tax at all. So you're not, you don't come under the purview of the central tax at all. 10 lakh threshold would mean that even the smaller businesses would come under the threshold for central GST as well as state GST. However, what is encouraging is to see is a move to say that up to 1.5 crores of turnover, while you pay both central GST and state GST, but you will only be administered by the state government officials. That would mean that you don't need to, really deal with multiple officials and and do paperwork sort of twice over. So that comes as a relief for the businesses. But yes, I mean, you really have to see whether the state governments have the wherewithal and the administrative setup to really do so much of audit and so much of paperwork if all the businesses over 10 lakhs are covered.
Reckon that this GST threshold
yes,
would you reckon that the GST threshold, you spoke about how it would be difficult for the state governments to go through this, but would you reckon that this GST threshold, the 10 lakh amount, will be contested in the July meeting as well? Perhaps there could be some issue. Could it be slightly flexible wherein you bring it up and reach perhaps a midpoint?
I don't think so, because see, this act has been drafted by the central government in consultation of the state governments, and the state governments are, obviously were pushing for a lower threshold. So I guess this has been discussed, in detail, and they have arrived at this consensus of 10 lakhs. I think if this dual control issue of 1.5 crore or below 1.5 crore is settled, then perhaps this amount will not be so much of a contentious issue anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you about the issue with respect to e-commerce company, or rather, the details that have been presented. Essentially, the tax collection at source system proposed will be applicable to e-commerce companies. Would you reckon that this will increase the kind of compliance on e-commerce companies? How will this change the game then?
Yes, I mean, I think this has come as a big setback, I would say. I just do hope that government considers it very carefully, because what they're trying to introduce is some kind of a tax collection at source, where you collect the amount from the customer, and when you're making the payment to the vendor, as in the e-commerce companies are making the payment to the vendor, they deduct that amount, they pay to the government, and the vendors sort of claim the credit later. I think there are multiple issues with this. E-commerce companies, the large ones, are dealing with thousands of vendors and suppliers. For them, it will be a lot of compliance burden. And also, I don't know how the mechanism would work, because if vendors may be supplying in various states, so does it mean that e-commerce companies will have to go to each state and take a registration and all of those things, in terms of paperwork and compliance? And if the vendor is operating at a thin margin, which in many cases they would do, then that would mean that they'll have to claim a refund from the government. So I think, rather than doing that, if they ask the e-commerce companies to provide all the details in terms of where the goods, started from and where it went, etc., and then they can directly sort of proceed against the vendors if they don't pay tax. So making e-commerce companies responsible for tax collection at source, I think, is slightly unfair for a sunrise industry in India. So I guess there's something which needs to be deliberated, discussed, and then a final call has to be taken.
Okay, another point, Pratik, that your statement has highlighted is the fact that work contracts now being treated as service will simplify things. What sectors would watch this out for us? Simplify this. What does this mean for services like the infrastructure sector, for example?
Yeah, so today what happens is a works contract, which is basically a contract which involves, material and services like a construction of a flyover, a construction of a building. You need to split it between, a material value and a services value, and you have to pay service tax on the services component and, and VAT on the material component, and this leads to a lot of issues in terms of litigation and compliances and double taxation and so on and so forth. What they're saying is that works contracts and along with that all the intangibles like software and things like that will all qualify as service. That would mean that in one stroke, the issue of double taxation, as in the same sort of value getting taxed both for the purposes of VAT and service tax, will be avoided. And and it will be a more simple way. So I think the infrastructure sector in general, EPC contractors, infrastructure power, they should all be happy about this.
Okay, quickly, we're very tight on time. 3 key takeaways that you would take from that model GST draft that has been uploaded.
I think this is a significant improvement over the first draft. I think a lot of detailed work has happened. The input credit provisions are liberal. There has been an attempt to sort of reduce litigation by simplifying the law in terms of software, works contract that I spoke about. There is a clarity as to who is the service provider, who is the service recipient. They're talking about avoiding sort of dual control for small businesses. So I think there are a lot of good things which are there. As I said, issue about e-commerce industry is something which to my mind is a bit of a dampener, which needs to be very thought through.
All right, Pratik, thank you so much for joining in on this show. Appreciate you having in to decode that important update or important fine print that PwC has pointed out.